I never imagined how my life would pan out. This is my tale, and my name is Anna. I was raised by kind farmers who instilled in me the importance of diligence and hard work. We had been taking care of the crops and livestock before the sun came up since I could walk. Back then, life was easy. After going to school, I would return home and assist on the farm. The purpose of weekends was to catch up on household tasks and spend time with family. I was content with the knowledge I had. However, following my high school graduation, everything changed. Thank God, my parents didn't want me to grow up on a farm. "Anna, we've been talking," my dad stated one evening during supper. "I agree with your mother that you ought to attend college." And my universe expanded instantly after that. After packing my things, I relocated to the city, which was like a whole new planet from my previous surroundings. It was an experience going to college. The individuals were the ones who truly opened my eyes, even though the lessons were intriguing. Students arrived from a variety of backgrounds, and I was surprised by their aspirations and intentions. And then in my third year, I met Scott. He was much different from the country guys back home. He was charming and self-assured. Scott appeared to have a clear vision of his ideal existence. "Life is too short to work all the time," he would remark as he lay on the library's lawn. "We should enjoy it while we're young." I became engrossed. Instead of life being a work list, he made it look like an adventure. After we started dating, we were discussing marriage before I realized it. My folks were wary when I informed them. They were eager to meet and get to know the man who had captured my heart, Scott. My dad remarked, "He seems nice enough, but there's something I can't put my finger on," following Scott's first visit to the farm. "Please use caution, Anna." I dismissed his worries. What knowledge of love did my traditional father possess? Our life was going to be great because Scott was amazing. Being the generous people that they are, my parents even paid for our wedding and purchased a city apartment for us. "We wish you a successful beginning," my mother replied, her eyes moist. I gave them a strong embrace and said, "Thanks, Mom and Dad. I swear I'll bring you pride." I felt like my life was complete when Scott and I exchanged rings and vows at the altar. I had a wonderful career in the city, a spouse I believed loved me, and a promising future. I thought our marriage was going well for the first few years of it. Scott and I established a pattern since we were both city workers. However, when I go back, I can see the warning signals that things weren't as good as I had assumed. "Is it really necessary for us to spend this weekend at your parents' farm?" Scott would always be upset when I proposed a visit. "It has a manure smell to it, and your dad always asks me to help. They're my family, Scott, and they've done so much for us." I would sigh and attempt to explain. "All right, but I'm not shoving any cow poop," he would complain. I dismissed it, assuming he was simply a city lad who wasn't accustomed to living on a farm. Though I wonder now if those Sensen tasks were a warning sign, I grew up with them. I became pregnant 3 years into our marriage. My parents were ecstatic, and I was ecstatic. My mother exclaimed, "A grandchild," over the phone. "Oh, Anna, you have our deepest gratitude." Scott, though, wasn't feeling quite as thrilled. A child already. I suppose that's all right. I assumed he was just apprehensive and that he would get used to the thought of becoming a father. As usual, my parents provided me with unwavering support. They paid for our travels as well as the automobile we purchased. Though Scott seemed to take it all for granted, I was really appreciative. "Obviously, they're assisting us," he would respond. "Parents are expected to do that." I was immediately in love with our son Peter at the time of his birth, but Scott found it difficult. Despite his best efforts, he struggled to become a father. He used to be upset when Peter wept at night, saying, "Can't you keep that quiet?" A few of us have early shifts at work. I told myself that we were both still getting acclimated to being parents, so I forced myself to swallow my annoyance. As time passed, we continued to visit the farm whenever we could, despite Scott's growing reluctance on each visit. He would moan, "Your dad wants me to help fix the tractor again." I am not a technician. I used to see my dad and Scott working together, with my dad patiently demonstrating fixes for him as Scott clumsily fumbled with the equipment, appearing irritated. Then my parents died within a year of one another. I was devastated. I cried into Scott's shoulder. They're gone. It's unbelievable that they're truly gone. He added, "It'll be okay," and gave me an uncomfortable back pat. They did leave the property, at least. I was astonished by what he said. All Scott could think about was what we'd inherited, the farm, my family's heritage. A few months later, Scott dropped a bombshell. We should sell the farm, he said one night at dinner. We could buy a big house in the city and live like royalty. I wanted to argue, to fight for my family's legacy, but I was so tired, worn down by grief and the challenges of being a mom. Wasn't I supposed to support my husband's decisions? "Okay," I said quietly, "if you think it's best." And just like that, with a few signatures on some papers, my family's history was sold to the highest bidder. The money went into our joint account, and Scott was overjoyed. "We're set for life, Anna," he said, thrilled. "No more working ourselves to the bone. We can do whatever we want now." I nodded and smiled, trying to push down the emptiness I felt inside. This was what Scott wanted, and as his wife, wasn't I supposed to support him? After selling the farm, life changed. The money from the sale gave us some comfort. I'll give Scott that. We didn't have to work as hard anymore. We both cut back to part-time hours, and for a while, it felt like we were living the dream. But as time passed, I started noticing things. Scott, who had never been much of a hard worker, seemed to lose all motivation. He'd quit jobs without a second thought, always with some excuse. That boss was a jerk, he'd say, or they expected too much. "I'm not a slave, you know." I tried to reason with him. "Scott, we can't live off the farm money forever. We need to think about the future." He just waved me off. "Relax, Anna. We're set for life. Why work ourselves to death?" Meanwhile, our son Peter was growing up quickly. He finished high school, then college, and soon he was working and living on his own. I was so proud of him, but I missed having him around. One day, I was reading the newspaper when a name jumped out at me. It was an article about a successful concrete plant owned by Scott's Uncle John. "Scott," I called out, "did you see this article about your Uncle John?" Scott's face darkened. "I don't want to hear about that old tyrant," he snapped. I knew the story, at least Scott's version of it. His parents had died when he was young, leaving him in the care of his uncle. Scott always said John had been controlling, trying to force him into the family business. He never listened to what I wanted. Scott had told me years ago. It was always about what he thought was best, so I left and started my own life. Looking at Scott now, lounging in his robe at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, I couldn't help but wonder if there was more to the story. "Maybe it's time to make peace," I suggested gently. "It's been years, Scott. People change." Scott's reaction was instant and explosive. "Make peace with that control freak? No way. Drop it, Anna." I let it go, but the whole thing left me feeling uneasy. There was so much anger, so much resentment in Scott's words. It made me wonder what else he was holding on to, what other parts of himself he was keeping hidden. One quiet Friday afternoon, I overheard Scott on the phone. His voice was short and cold. "I'm not interested in his life, and it doesn't concern me," he said sharply before hanging up. My curiosity got the better of me. "Who was that, honey?" I asked. Scott's face showed no emotion. "Hospital. My uncle's sick. If he dies, maybe I'll finally get something out of him." I was shocked. "Scott, that's a horrible thing to say. He raised you." "Yeah, and he made my life hell." Scott snapped. "I'm not going to see him." End of story. He picked up the remote and settled back into his chair. Something broke inside me. This wasn't the man I had married. This wasn't the person I thought I knew. Without saying a word to Scott, I went to the bedroom and called Peter. "Hey, sweetie," I said when he answered. "How would you feel about meeting your great uncle?" Peter was surprised, but agreed quickly. An hour later, we walked into the hospital, my heart racing. The ICU was filled with the sound of beeping machines and soft voices. There in a bed surrounded by monitors was Scott's Uncle John. He looked small and weak, nothing like the controlling man Scott had described. When we introduced ourselves, his eyes filled with tears. "Anna, Peter," he said, his voice soft but warm. "I've wanted to meet you for so long." For the next hour, John told us his side of the story. He explained how he had taken Scott in after his parents died and raised him like his own. "I loved that boy," John said, his voice breaking. "I wanted him to have everything, carry on the family business, have a good life. But Scott had other ideas." John went on to explain that Scott didn't want the responsibility. He said he didn't want to work hard like I did, staying up at night worrying about the business. As John spoke, I felt a sinking feeling. His words painted a picture I knew all too well. "Scott demanded I sell the business," John said, shaking his head. "He wanted me to give him a monthly allowance, an apartment, a car. He said I owed him a carefree life." I glanced at Peter, and I could see the same shock on his face. "I told him that's not how life works," John continued. "I begged him to stay and learn the business, but he just got angry. He said he'd find a rich wife and never have to work again." I sat in Uncle John's hospital room, and memories from the past 12 years flooded my mind. It was like I was finally seeing the truth. Scott had never kept a job for long. He always worked part-time, called in sick, and took lots of days off. I had always thought it was because he was stressed or just a free spirit, but now I understand. He would always say, "Life is for fun, Anna. Why work so hard?" A sick feeling hit me. As I realized that Scott didn't marry me for love, he married me for my family's money, for the easy life he thought I could give him. I was just a way for him to get what he wanted, the rich wife he had promised his uncle he'd find. Tears filled my eyes as the truth sank in. Our life, our marriage, our family, it had all been built on a lie. Uncle John's weak voice pulled me from my thoughts. "I'm so sorry," he said. "I wanted to leave something for you and Peter, but I can't." "It's okay," I said, squeezing his hand. "We don't need anything." "I had plans," John continued, sounding upset. "A new project. It would have changed everything, but I ran out of time." Suddenly, John's face twisted in pain, and the machines around him started beeping urgently. A nurse rushed in. "You need to leave," she said. A few days later, the call came. Uncle John had passed away. When I told Scott, his reaction made my blood run cold. "Finally," he exclaimed, grinning. "Took the old bastard long enough." I stared at him, horrified. "Scott, he was your uncle. He raised you." Scott waved me off. Yeah. So when's the funeral?" "Do I need to go?" In the end, Scott didn't attend the funeral. Peter and I arranged it ourselves. It was a small, dignified service that I hoped would have made Uncle John proud. While I was mourning a man I had barely known, my husband was at home celebrating, calculating his new wealth. I overheard him on the phone when I got home, saying, "The factory's got to be worth at least $30 million. Can you believe it? I'm rich." I watched Scott strut around the house, bragging about his inheritance, and felt nothing but disgust. This wasn't the man I thought I'd married. He was a stranger in my husband's skin. Then things got even worse. One evening, Scott looked at me with cold eyes and said, "Anna, you're getting kind of old for me. I think it's time for an upgrade." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Excuse me?" I asked. He shrugged, not even trying to look guilty. "You heard me. I'm rich now. I can do better." Over the next few weeks, Scott's behavior spiraled out of control. He stayed out late, coming home in the early morning reeking of alcohol and perfume. More than once, I was left feeling like I had lost everything. I noticed lipstick stains on Scott's collar, and every time I confronted him, he brushed me off. "Mind your own business," he'd say. "You should be grateful I come home at all." One night, as I lay awake listening to him stumble in at 4:00 a.m., I realized something had to change. I couldn't keep living like this. I deserved better, but more importantly, I needed to know the truth. About Scott, about the inheritance, and about the life I thought we had built together. One morning, after another night of Scott coming home at dawn, I'd had enough. "Where were you?" I demanded, my voice shaking with anger and hurt. Scott rubbed his bloodshot eyes and narrowed them at me. "None of your damn business, Anna. You should be grateful I even come back at all." I felt like I'd been slapped. Grateful. Is that what you think our marriage is? He ignored my question, his eyes calculating. "How much is left from your parents' inheritance? We must have some savings, right?" The sudden change of topic caught me off guard. "What, Scott? We've spent it all. The accounts are empty." His face twisted with disgust. "Empty? You've got to be kidding me." He paced the room, muttering to himself, then turned to me, his eyes cold. "Well, I guess that's it then. I'm done here. Done with you." Before I could respond, the front door opened, and Peter walked in. His eyes widened as he saw the tension in the room. Scott's demeanor shifted instantly. He forced a smile and walked over to our son. "Peter, my boy. Just the person I wanted to see. I need you to sign something for me." Scott pulled a document from his pocket and handed it to Peter. "It's just a formality. You're giving up any claim to Uncle John's estate. Since there's no will, it all comes to me anyway." Peter looked confused, glancing at me for guidance. After I gave him a small nod, he signed the paper without hesitation. Scott's grin was triumphant as he grabbed the document back. Then, as if a switch had flipped, he turned to me, his voice cold and flat. "I want a divorce," he said. "I never loved you, Anna. I just put up with you for your parents' money. But now I'm rich. I don't need you anymore." His words hit me like a punch. Even though, deep down, I had suspected this, hearing it laid out so bluntly was still devastating. "I'm moving to Uncle John's house," Scott continued, already packing a suitcase. "Don't try to contact me. It's over." And just like that, he was gone. 33 years of marriage packed into a suitcase and out the door. I stood there, frozen, trying to make sense of what had just happened. It felt unreal, like a bad dream. I couldn't hold it together any longer. "Mom." Peter's voice was soft, full of concern. "Mom, are you okay?" I turned to look at my son, my steady rock, and the dam broke. Tears poured down my face as Peter wrapped his arms around me. "It's okay, Mom," he whispered, holding me tight. "We'll get through this. You're strong, and you'll be okay." As I clung to him, sobbing into his shoulder, I couldn't help but be amazed at the man he had become kind and compassionate, everything his father wasn't. Then I realized something. "You're the best thing he ever did," I whispered to Peter. "The only good thing to come out of this marriage." Peter hugged me even tighter, and in that moment, I knew that no matter what happened, I wasn't alone. I had my son, and together, we'd face whatever came next. The weeks after Scott left were a blur of pain and disbelief. I tried to stay strong, to focus on moving forward, but it wasn't easy. Scott seemed determined to flaunt his new life right in my face. It started with his Facebook posts. Pictures of Uncle John's mansion, which was now Scott's home, filled his timeline. I tried to ignore it and focus on healing. Then the photos changed. A young woman started appearing in them. She was blonde, beautiful, and barely older than Peter. In one photo, Scott had his arm around her, both of them smiling at the camera. The caption made me feel sick. Asterisk meet my fiancée Joyce. Upgrade complete asterisk. The call started almost immediately. Friends, acquaintances, even some of Peter's old teachers reached out. "Anna, dear, is everything okay?" We saw Scott's posts. "What's going on?" I couldn't take it anymore. The humiliation, the constant reminders of Scott's betrayal. It was all too much. So I did something I never thought I'd do. I called Scott and asked to meet after speaking with a lawyer. The day of the meeting arrived, and I waited at our old favorite cafe, divorce papers in hand. Scott strolled in with Joyce on his arm. She couldn't have been more than 27, her face covered in makeup. Giggling at something, Scott whispered in her ear. Well, Scott smirked as he pulled out a chair for Joyce. "If it isn't the old ball and chain. Joyce, honey, meet Anna, the starter wife." Joyce gave me a pitying look that made my blood boil, but I kept my cool. "I have the divorce papers here," I said, sliding them across the table. "I'm not asking for much, just the house. You can keep everything else." To my surprise, Scott picked up the pen without a word. "Fine, have your little house. I've got bigger and better things now," he said, scribbling his signature on the papers. Then he turned to Joyce, his voice dripping with fake sweetness. "Now I can finally be with someone I truly love, someone worthy of me." I gathered the papers, my hands shaking a little, and walked out of the cafe. Behind me, I could hear Scott's mocking laughter, but I didn't look back. I had what I came for. The next day, I filed for divorce. As I handed the papers to the court clerk, I felt a huge weight lift off my shoulders. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. Life has a funny way of bringing justice when you least expect it. For me, it came in the form of a newspaper headline. Asterisk local business tycoon's empire crumbles. Nephew left with massive debt asterisk. It turned out Uncle John had taken out a huge loan just before he passed, hoping to expand his business. He had mentioned something about a new project during our hospital visit, but Peter and I hadn't understood the impact at the time. Now it all made sense. I watched from afar as Scott's new life fell apart. He sold the factory, the mansion, the cars, everything, and he still owed nearly $1 million. The icing on the cake. His young fiancée, Joyce, packed her bags and left as soon as she realized Scott wasn't the rich man she thought he was. I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel a bit of satisfaction. Karma had finally caught up with Scott. Then one rainy evening, there was a knock at my door. I opened it to find Scott standing there, looking nothing like the smug, wealthy man who had walked out on me months ago. He was a mess, his eyes red and desperate. "Anna," he said, his voice cracking, "I've been such a fool." "I see that now. Please, can we talk?" I allowed him in against my better judgment. I listened for the next hour as Scott opened out to me. He shared with me his story of losing everything and discovering what was truly important in life. He begged, I was wrong, Anna, as he spoke. Very incorrect. But now I see, you were the one person who ever showed me genuine concern. The sole true love of my life. Then to my surprise, Scott dropped on one knee and produced a little velvet package. Please give me another opportunity, Anna. Remarry me. If we work together, we can overcome anything. I remained silent for a while. Then I did something that really startled me. I started to giggle. I laughed a little at first, but then I burst out laughing so hard that tears streamed down my face. Scott's face fell. With confusion, he said, "What's so funny?" I glanced directly at Scott once I had finally gathered my breath. Oh, Scott, were you really expecting it to be that simple? That after discarding me and treating me like garbage, you could come crawling back when your life went apart. With a darker expression, he got up, looking irritated. His words were, "Listen here," growling. This is also my home. I am entitled to certain privileges. I quietly strolled up to the drawer that held the divorce paperwork, took them out, and presented his signature to him. You don't, Scott. You gave up ownership of this house by signing. I own it. Now leave, or I'll contact the police. I briefly believed he may protest, but my expression must have shown that I was sincere. He turned and rushed out, slamming the door behind him, without further word. I contacted Peter as soon as he left and told him everything. As usual, my amazing son offered assistance. Mom, you made the right decision, he added. I'm proud of you. I treasured those remarks more than he can ever know. Over the next few weeks, I made some significant choices. The home felt too vast for me alone, with all its memories, both happy and unpleasant. In order to purchase a comfortable apartment in a bustling district I had always adored, I sold it and used the proceeds. I feel like my life is just getting started at 62. I've been traveling, going to all the locations Scott said we would go, but we never did. I've attempted salsa dancing, joined a reading club, and taken up painting. I see Scott around town every now and again. He now has an older appearance as a result of his errors and poor decisions. Although my expectations for life were not met, guess what? Nothing would be altered by me. I'm genuinely, fully pleased being myself for the first time in a very long time.